Welcome to Figure Feedback. My name is Jeremy, and this is the Anycubic Photon P1. It is the latest resin 3D printer coming from Anycubic, and in this video, I'm going to share with you what my full experience using this printer over the last few weeks has been like. And I also have some cool models here that I'm going to show you some close-ups of so that you can get a much better idea of whether or not this is going to be a printer that you would like to purchase, which, by the way, if you do find yourself interested in purchasing it, you can find it over on Kickstarter. Now, as I record this, the Kickstarter has not yet started, but according to Anycubic, when it does start, the super early bird pricing for this printer is going to start at $499. And then, of course, there'll be different tiers with different things that you can do for different prices. So I'll leave a link in the description where you can go over there to check out what their current offerings are. Now, to get this started off, there are a few different things that I need to let you know about. And the first is this. Unfortunately, in this video, you're not going to see me actually testing the dual build plate and dual vat feature that was heavily marketed alongside this printer. And the reason for that is I have not received it by the time that I am obligated to complete this video. So because that hasn't come in yet, I wasn't able to check it out. I haven't been able to test it. But you do have my word that when this does come in, I'll just make a separate video showing you what the dual vat and dual build plate feature is like. And I might even do it in a live stream. So we'll just see how that goes. But as far as being in this video, unfortunately, it's not going to be here. The other thing that I have to let you know is that this model that I have here is one of the first units that they've sent out to people to test out. So that means that there may be some things inside or out that may be a little bit different from when you get yours. For the most part, I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same, but just know that there might be some things that change either on the hardware or software side from when you see this to when these ship out, which is expected to be sometime in February of 2026. So in Anycubic's marketing materials, they're pushing this printer as being industrial-like, something that you can use in more professional settings. And that kind of shows in the way that it looks. So as you can see, it is a very clean-looking machine with some very nice complementary colors. They're muted colors. You've got white, you've got a little bit of smoky black, and you have some gray. So this definitely looks like a machine that you can put inside of a more professional environment and not have it stand out like a sore thumb as being like a toy or a stereotypical hobbyist machine. And that's also what the dual vat and dual build plate feature were being marketed for as well. Something that you can put more expensive resins into, more viscous, more industrial-like resins to help you save on some of those materials. So maybe if you have two different types of materials or two different types of materials that are also different colors, you can print both of those at the same time, albeit they will have to be fairly small models, but when they're done, you can just put those two together to get the type of model that you want. But I also do have to tell you that even though they are saying that this is industrial-like, I don't want you to get confused into thinking that this is going to be an industrial printer for $500 because that's not true. It's not an industrial printer. It just has some qualities and features that Anycubic feels makes it more on par with some of the industrial printers out there. So, for example, when we see images of this being used to print like dentistry models, things like that, you should know that there are resin 3D printers out there that have to be certified to be used in a medical environment. Things that are, for example, are going to go inside of your mouth, like dentures. And from what I've seen, this printer does not have those particular certifications so that you could print things that you would actually put in your body. So the dental models that you might make from this are just going to be that, they can be models, they could be molds for production through some other means. But as far as it being a medical grade printer for this low price, do not get confused. It is not meant to be used for that, but it can be used to produce things that you can then take over to other more expensive machines to get that kind of use out of them. So I got my notes in front of me, as you see, and I'm just going to quickly go over some of the specs of this printer. And I'm not going to go into all the details like I did in the last video, but just something to kind of get you up to speed and just some of the biggest bites of information from this printer. Now, this is going to be a mid-size printer. It is not small, but at the same time, it's not huge. And it's also pretty lightweight, so you won't have any problems moving it around. But it does have a 10.1-inch 14K display with a total build area of 223 by 126 by 230 millimeters. And it also on the front has this 4.5-inch resistive touchscreen. So it is not a capacitive touchscreen. And that just means that when you press around on the screen, it's not going to be as easy. It's not going to be as responsive as a regular capacitive touchscreen, but it still gets the job done and is still easy to work with. So you don't have to worry about that. Also on this touchscreen, they have put the power button right there on the side, which is a great thing in my opinion, because you don't have to go around the back to turn it on and turn it off. And then also on the side of the screen, they have a spot for a USB stick, which does come with the printer. And you can use that USB stick to transfer your files that you slice from the Anycubic Photon Workshop slicer. And you can also use that USB stick to export time lapses that you can enable on this printer through the built-in camera to go onto that USB stick. This printer also does have some built-in storage, so you don't have to have the USB stick already inserted before you start things like time lapses. You can just let it store right here on the printer, and then when you're ready, you can come back and you can take it right off. Now, one of the other things that makes this printer more industrial-like is some of the intelligent features that it's capable of. There's different sensors and stuff within this printer to just make the process a little bit easier for you and to prevent things from going wrong. For example, it knows whether or not you have the VAT installed, and it knows whether or not you have the build plate installed. And when you are printing, it dynamically compensates for the environment around it and the flow of the resin to just dynamically adjust things such as the lift speeds, for example. So as you're looking at this printing, if you are just looking at the timer, you can see that sometimes the timer will go up and then sometimes it'll go down. It'll just jump. And that's because the printer is trying to intelligently figure out approximately how long it's going to take for the prints to get finished based on the environment that it's currently in. Now, just going back to the design of this printer, like I said, it is a very nice minimalistic design. And then over on the back, there's also a port that you can connect a hose to so that you can exhaust resin fumes away from your work area. But another thing about this printer that's different from any resin printer that I've used has to do with this lid here. So as you can see, it is sort of like a smoky colored clear lid. And that is different from other printers that I've used that either have really dark shaded lids, or they have like an orange tinted lid, or in the case of my older Photon Mono 4K, a yellowish lid. And because they decided to make this change with this particular lid, it means that the amount of UV light that can come into the printer is going to be more than a lid that is yellow or one of the other darker lids that I told you about. Now, even though I personally have not had any problems with this lid as far as UV light getting through, I do have some bright daylight balance bulbs right above my head, and then I have a soft box that's right to the right of where I am right now. And I spend a lot of time in here, and these lights are on a lot of the time. But those daylight balance lights have not been able to penetrate this lid to cure the resin on the inside. However, I do know someone, and perhaps you know them too, and that person also happens to be Ross from Fohammer, who's probably going to mention this in his video. But I do think that this is important, and you should definitely know about it. And from him as well, he got a statement from Anycubic kind of explaining this whole lid situation. And I'm just going to read it as it was sent verbatim. It says that the transparent cover we use has a lower blocking rate for 405 nanometer UV light compared to the yellow cover. Then I'm going to skip through a little bit of this text here, and it says, therefore, we recommend operating resin printers in a dark environment. But during printing, no direct UV light is emitted from outside of the machine. And for situations where exposure inspection is required, the UV cover, regardless of its color, needs to be open. Therefore, the color of the UV cover has almost no impact on exposure checking. For indoor lighting conditions, the transparency level we selected provides more than 50% shielding for all light wavelengths, which is sufficient to protect resin from the weak UV light present in typical indoor fluorescent lighting. So it just means that it's not going to protect the resin from curing with artificial lights as good as the yellow cover, but it still provides some level of protection. So if you wanted to use this in a really super bright environment, just know that this lid is not going to hold up as well as the others. But like I said, it has not been a problem for me inside of this space. Now, once you get beyond the cover and you look on the inside of the printer, you'll see that there is a camera right there in the back. It also comes with a little lens cover, which I've already lost. And then there are also two lights next to it. Now, those lights emit a sort of yellowish orangish glow, and that light can be on pretty much all the time when you are printing with the time-lapse feature enabled, and it has not affected the resin in any way whatsoever. So when that light is on, you don't have to worry about it accidentally curing your resin. But the tray that the resin sits in, I really like how they implemented this resin vat, because they don't use those little screws in order to secure it. Instead, there are two latches, one on either side. Since this vat is heated, it has some mechanical connections on the back of it that insert into these other mechanical connections that are near the back of the printer. So it's really easy to just line that up and sit it down to get the the vat nice and firm. And then those latches just close with a satisfying click. It is so much easier and more convenient than fiddling around with the knobs, and I really appreciate that. And then also for this particular vat, it has a decent size pour spout as well. So when you change resins and you're pouring your resin back into the bottle, get yourself a nice area for that resin to flow into, so that you don't have to worry about the resin going over the taller sides and spilling all over the place and getting underneath the vat, and then you have to clean off the film on the bottom. You don't have to worry about that. And so I'm happy that they implemented that. Also, what they've implemented on the front of the vat is a spot where you can hang the build plate, which is great to have because this has a flat stainless steel build plate by default. They're also going to sell a perforated build plate that has holes in it, but the one that you are going to get when you just buy the printer normally is going to be flat on top. And that means that resin is going to pool on the top when the print is done and the plate raises to the top. Now, for me, when you take this plate off of the printer, it makes just the most logical sense to take it straight off the printer and then just put it right there into those two grooves. The only issue is the grooves are located on the front of the vat. So that means that even though the resin is flowing back into the vat, it also means that the handle for the build plate is now jutting out towards you, and it's jutting out so far that you're not able to close the lid when you do that. And then also there's going to be two drips of resin on either side that's going to start slowly coming down once you angle it like that. And so if you're around, you can just get like a quick paper towel and just wipe up those two drips that are forming before it goes too far and it ends up sliding off of the handle and getting onto your table. That's not a huge deal, but that's something that I had to definitely tell you about. And then the other thing is you could also turn the build plate around the opposite way, but that's really awkward to me because once you take it off of the arm, you have to turn it around and got to be careful that you're not going too far to the left or too far to the right so that you don't have resin dripping past the vat. And if you hang it on the opposite side so that the handle is now facing the inside of the printer as opposed to the outside, you can close the lid if your model is not super tall. But if you do have taller models, then those models are going to be sticking out past the printer, and then any resin drips from those models will just go down onto the machine, or they'll go down onto the table. So I just wish that a way to hang the build plate was either from the side of the vat or even like near the top, so that it won't be going towards the outside of the printer, you know? But if that does happen, it's great that Anycubic had the foresight to make sure that there's not like a whole bunch of like gaps underneath the vat, so that, you know, resin gets into those cracks and can kind of mess things up. So the fact that it's nice and clear underneath the vat, if you do have like a little resin spill, it's not going to be like a huge deal, because there aren't a whole lot of places for that resin to just sort of seep into. But it is resin, so if that does happen, you do want to make sure that you clean that up as soon as you can, just to be on the safe side. So also been reading on social media, some people have been wondering how easy it is to actually change the screen. And there's actually been a reply to that from Anycubic. And they do say that the machine does not, you don't have to disassemble the machine in order to change the screen. And they gave a step-by-step procedure on how to do it. So you're going to have to peel off the protective sticker on the screen and remove 8 screws and the screen bracket. And then you lift up the screen, preferably using a suction cup, unplug the connector, and secure the cable to prevent it from falling. Then you put in the new screen and you guide the cable through the opening of the base, put the bracket back on, and put the screws back in. And then you have to apply a new protective sticker that starts from the side near the control screen, avoiding the wave release film area. So it sounds like it's not going to be all that complicated to change the screen on these. Now, you also notice that it mentioned the wavy release screen, and you can kind of see it in the right light when you take the vat off. And that waviness, Anycubic says, helps to reduce peeling forces by about 60%. And in my mind, I'm going, because you have this extra layer of whatever on top of the screen, what does that do for the actual print quality? In my experience, looking at the prints that I made, if there is any difference in print quality, it is going to be very little and not noticeable to the majority of people who are like really looking at it really hard and doing some very serious comparisons. So I guess if that's going to be the trade-off, less peeling force versus a minuscule amount of quality loss as far as detail goes on your model, the model still look good. So I'm happy with it. I don't have any problem with the wave release bill. Now let's take a look at some of these prints here. So I've got some miniatures here that I love, and then I also have some larger models to show as well. And I've used different resins for this. The white models were printed with Anycubic's white water washable resin. And then I also have this Ultron bust here that was printed with Anycubic's high clear resin, and that just is some really good resin. Seeing how this Ultron turned out, now of course he looks frosty because that's how clear prints are going to look after they've been washed and after they've been cured. There's different things that you can do to bring back the transparentness to it, but just by looking at him here without doing any post-processing, I think he looks really good. The detail is there. You are going to see some remnants of supports like in the cracks and crevices. That's just resin printing. You have to get rid of all of those. But man, this clear Ultron turned out really, really nice. And I also think the white models with the water washable resin also came out looking really, really good. I know that they're white and it's harder to see details on the white, but trust me, it's there. As you look at this Solaire figure from Dark Souls and take a look at his shield, and you can see that the sun is etched into there. And even beyond that, even with the supports that are on these models, you can look at some of these white models and you will have a hard time finding the remnants of those supports, like the bumps that you get when you remove supports. That's going to be present on any printer, but I don't know what this printer does, but it did a really good job at making sure that those divots and bumps were not marring up the surface of the model in any way that is going to be a turn off. So these models look pretty darn clean after removing the supports and without doing any post-processing to get rid of any signs of where those supports were. Now, when it comes to removing the supports with the Anycubic resin, I decided to use their standard profile settings that are built into the now beta version of the Anycubic Photon workshop that will be available by the time you guys get this printer. And I didn't find the supports to be like really hard to remove, but I still needed to use a hair dryer to heat them up in order to make it easier to remove. Just to make things easier on my fingers so that those supports don't pierce my gloves. That's something I didn't want to happen. So I did have to apply some heat to get those supports off. Nothing too crazy, but they, just look at them. They ended up looking really, really nice. I think this printer finds itself in a pretty interesting position because when you look at it from a consumer perspective and what a consumer will want in a resin 3D printer, it checks a lot of the boxes. For example, it is a heated vat, so it goes up to 40 degrees Celsius. You can control the temperature of that heated vat. It has that built-in camera. It has these AI features and these detection features to help you to get a more successful print, or at least tell you when something has gone wrong. And Anycubic says that this printer is capable of printing some really thick and viscous resins up to 8,000 centipoise, which is a lot, which is pretty thick. And I looked around, I wasn't able to find any other consumer level printer that makes that specific claim about printing resins that thick of a viscosity. But then you also have to look at it from the other perspective, which is the industrial-like perspective that would be tailored towards someone who's not just a regular consumer hobbyist that wants to print miniatures and statues like these, but for someone who wants to use this printer for a lot more serious applications. And I think once you get to that level where you have someone that's looking for an industrial 3D printer, I think that they're going to be looking for a printer that's either industrial or not industrial, and not necessarily industrial like, because then they'll start thinking like, well, what does that mean exactly? What am I giving up going for this printer that is, going to be $500 on Kickstarter when it's available at the earliest versus a printer that costs twice as much or more than this printer. And for them, I think it'll be a little bit harder of a sell, because I think that once you really decide that you want that industrial quality period, then you're probably going to start looking for a printer that is actually industrial and not necessarily something that's kind of, sort of, but not really industrial. You know what I mean? And then you have to look at the dual vat in the dual build plate feature. I think for a regular hobbyist, they're going to look at that and wonder, what exactly do I need this for? Because you're going to be reducing your available build volume so that you can print on both sides of the plate. And it's great that you can control each side of the vat with its own parameters. I think that's really cool. But to the regular hobbyist, I think they're going to have a hard time trying to figure out exactly what they would be using it for. I've seen people saying things like, well, if I'm going to do that, I can just go out and just buy 2 printers, put them side by side, and just use the entire vat and use the entire build plate. They can't really understand exactly why they would need something like this. And that's why I think that that particular thing would cater more towards the more professional, industrial-like consumer, because the way that I think that they will be looking at it is, despite the smaller build volume when you use that dual vat system, I think that they're going to be looking at it as, what other 3D printer can you find on the market at the $500 range that says that you can print 8,000 CPS resins? And if you can do that in 2 different vats, that can be very beneficial to you. And then in terms of just buy 2 printers and then just use more of the volume, well, this is starting at $500, and I don't think you're going to be able to find a Resin 3D printer for $250 that can do all of the things that this printer can do. So then that makes it more of a favorable to Anycubic to have just this one machine in that particular scenario at that particular price. At the same time, I think that this printer is going to have a very specific use case, because if you do just want to use it as it is without the dual vat, without any of the industrial type of applications, it's still going to be a very solid printer. I enjoy using this printer. I think this printer has been very reliable for me. It is quiet. I love the fact that it's not super loud. The fan does not blow me out of the room, and it is lightweight. It's not heavy, which is good, but at the same time, it's not industrial from the way that it feels, you know? So I think that this is a good printer overall. I say all of that to say that yes, it is a good printer, but I think that you're going to definitely have to look at the use cases that you think you would have for something like this and decide that if you want to go all in and invest in all the things that this printer is capable of and take that added price, and then that might be worth it for you in the end. But if you're just looking for a regular hobby machine, it's still good for that $500 price. But you just kind of have to look at it as being more towards the hobby side and less towards the industrial side, all things considered. So that's going to do it for now. And once again, I will leave a link in the description to the Kickstarter if you want to go check it out and see what offerings are available there. So thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and I'll speak to you soon.